Red Dead Redemption 2. What's not to talk about this game? First of all, it's the 8th best-selling of all time. According to Wikipedia, that is. And at that, was critically acclaimed for its gameplay, vast open world, and one of the best stories ever told in a video game.
One kiss is all it takes.
And also happens to be one of the most depressing stories ever told in a video game.
I had a son. He passed away. I had a girl who loved me. I threw that away. My mama died when I was a kid. I guess I'm afraid.
Only rivaled by The Last of Us 2. Which wasn't very good, but hey, misery's misery. Anyway, at the time of writing, it has been about 5 years since the release of Red Dead Redemption 2, which is plenty of time for Rockstar to be cooking up some new DLC. And for the Red Dead Redemption franchise, there is one DLC that has not only been popular in the Red Dead fandom, but also been known as one of the best DLCs ever made. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about the well-known Undead Nightmare DLC for Red Dead Redemption 1. At the time of its release, zombies in video games was kind of a fad. Call of Duty, Left 4 Dead popularized zombies in video games in the early 2000s, and such games as The Last of Us and the Telltale Walking Dead games later on. So this video will pretty much be a playful little prediction, speculation of if a new DLC for Red Dead Redemption 2 comes out, and just so happens to be related to Undead Nightmare would be like. So get your cowboy hats on and your sawed-off shotguns ready, because we're going to be talking about Red Dead Redemption 2 Undead Nightmare. Insert intro. In the original Undead Nightmare, there's a lot of changes made to the gameplay in order to keep it fresh from the original. Of course, this should also be the case for Undead Nightmare 2. For example, the Lost Souls missions to replace the bounties and the Survivor missions to replace the Stranger missions. It's fun to think of new possibilities for Undead Nightmare 2, like Arthur coming across the pig farm family in the zombie apocalypse. Or completely new missions, like Arthur finally helping that one dude to find Gavin. Also, things like the absolutely banging soundtrack and the cheesy cowboy zombie aesthetic that the original went for, that should of course be included in the sequel. Also, the lack of minigames in the DLC would also be appropriate to be left out, since they really don't add much, and were not included in Undead Nightmare. This section is going to be pretty short, since I don't really have much to say to keep in Undead Nightmare 2, other than the obvious, that made the first one so great. Anyway, on to the next section. First of all, the economy. In the original Undead Nightmare, money basically meant nothing. The only thing that was really useful was ammo, which was an interesting idea since in a zombie apocalypse, of course money doesn't have much value anymore. I felt the lack of the economy in Red Dead Redemption 2 really took away from its identity, since it was such a vital part of the base game. So, there are two scenarios that can fix this. One, we keep the economy just as it is, like in the base game. Or, two, we make the ammo the currency and remove the options to buy cosmetic clothes for Arthur, since that wouldn't really make much sense in a zombie apocalypse, despite how much I would love to dress Arthur up dapperly while he's killing zombies left and right. But in order to make up for this, we would have unique items in the store to replace them, like clothing that can protect from zombie bites and upgrades for weapons that can specifically help you hunt zombies down. And at that, ammo should be more scarce in order to add an extra layer of difficulty to the DLC. Also, to take advantage of Red Dead's 2 larger world, all the legendary ammo are now undead, and you can sell them to the Trapper for exclusive equipment, just like in the base game, but zombified. And not money, because, the economy. Speaking of undead animals, I think the apocalypse horses should be less.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
And have more impact on the game's story. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say on gameplay. Now for my favorite part, the story. This part of the video I'm probably most excited for, since I love the humor in Undead Nightmare, and I really like the campy B-movie zombie cowboy tone it goes for. I would imagine the story would go something like this. We start out in Chapter 2 since that's where most of the game is still alive, and the depressing story has not fully kicked in yet. And that's where I think the cheesy B movie will start. Kind of like in the first Undead Nightmare. I think it should start with Arthur coming back from Valentine or some sort of hunting trip in the woods. And I think the zombie infection should start with either Molly or Uncle, and they would be tied up just like in the first game, and Dutch would give another delusional speech of what they should do next. Then he would say something about Bill, John, and Arthur going to Valentine to try to find a cure for Uncle and Molly. But, in a turn of events, the whole town of Valentine was also infected with the zombie virus. Once the Vanderlyn gang gets the news about the virus spread all over the country, Dutch would decide that the gang needs to start fighting off the zombies. That is where the gameplay would probably start off, doing stranger and story missions while clearing out towns of the infected. After a few more gang members being infected, in a comedic way of course, then Dutch would have the idea of teaming up with the law in order to defeat the greater evil. The decision would be a little controversial, obviously, but the idea would be passed. So, Dutch, Arthur, John, Bill, Javier, and Charles would become lawmen. Not only do we get the joy of seeing Arthur and John in lawman uniform, and the realization that I just said that, but you'll probably get new buffs with the new equipment, of course. After doing a few more story missions with the lawman buff, the climax of the story would be similar to the original. Maybe Dutch heard of an ancient Aztec mask that disturbed the goddess, and was being put into a museum in St. Denis. And the story would end with the gang robbing the train with the mask in it, and put it back in its tomb. And all ends well. Unlike the actual game. Overall, I think every Red Dead player would love to see an Undead Nightmare sequel. Well, unless it's...
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
But hey, the sequel to Undead Nightmare doesn't have to be zombies. In the base game, there are UFOs and vampires you can encounter. And most would prefer a zombie game. Something fresh might not be bad. Yet, the reality is Rockstar kinda abandoned Red Dead, just wants to focus on GTA Online for the time being, since they see their Red Dead fans more as...
More ghosts than people. But them, they could...
I know.
So get your cowboy hats on. I'm leaving that as a blooper. I'm leaving that as a...